Thanks for listening to this podcast from Walks Around Britain. For more information, our terms of use, and to click through to see the show notes on our blog with photographs, videos, and links to related sites, please visit walksaroundbritain.co.uk.
In the 23rd edition of the Walks Around Britain podcast, we grab our sou'westers and take a trip around the shoreline with the long-running series Coast. Hello, and you're very welcome to the 23rd edition of the Walks Around Britain podcast. I'm Andrew White, and I'm your walking guide through the next 25 minutes or so of outdoor and walking chat. Now, this edition is a special featuring the popular long-running series Coast. First shown in 2005, the 9th series is back on BBC Two in the UK from the 14th of July. But the programme recently took a detour to make a series in Australia, which again was shown in the UK on BBC Two, and that series has just finished. Well, joining me now to talk to us about Coast Australia is one of the presenters of the series, Professor Emma Johnston, who's on Skype from Sydney. Emma, welcome to the Walks Around Britain podcast. Coast has been a great British institution, and it's really interesting to be watching the Australian version. How did you become involved with the series?
I know it's such an institution, but we've actually been watching it in Australia for some time, and I have been a big fan of Coast for since Series 1. I was really excited to see Series 1. And so when Coast Australia called me up, and they were calling me up as Professor and Director of the Sydney Harbour Research Program, I was so excited. I was absolutely thrilled, and I was willing to help and give them lots of stories. And they came round and had a chat, and I gave them lots of potential stories for the Sydney Harbour episode. And then they said, well, we're actually still casting for the marine biology presenter. And I was like, okay, well, here are a list of people. And they said, what about you? And I went, really? Me? And I was so excited, but I was also a tad nervous, having never presented on television before. So this was a big step for me. I'm a full-time academic and I'm very much a cameo presenter, but I've enjoyed it so much.
One of the hallmarks of Coast is that it hasn't featured people who have been very well known to viewers, but instead have used people who know their subject area. And that really shows on screen.
That's the lovely thing about it. Yeah, I don't feel like I shouldn't be there, because what they're after is some expertise and some empathy, I guess, for the topic that they're talking about. And for me, to be able to go around Australia, not only to see these absolutely stunning environments, but to talk to the researchers and the artists and the historians that work in those ecosystems, to me, it's just brilliant. And I think the enthusiasm that I have for the location just comes across on screen, and people pick up on that.
And quite a lot of the stories mix together different elements, don't they? You might be fronting that particular story, but it might also have a history element as well as being a story about marine ecology.
That's right. And I love it for that. I mean, none of us are we're not simple people. We're quite complex characters. All of us are complex characters. We have lots of different interests. And Coast doesn't assume that you're only interested in one thing. It assumes you're interested in life and biology and archaeology and history, and you get a little bit of a taste of everything. To me, that's what attracted me to the first series of Coast. And you're not pigeonholed. And I think it's important for everybody, audiences and professionals, not to be pigeonholed, because part of who you are is how you do your work. And from my perspective, I'm a professor of marine ecology, and I study human impacts in marine ecosystems. But I'm very aware that my background, my history, my sociology, all of those influence the way I do my research and the way I understand these ecosystems. That's what Coast is about. It's about saying, you're not just a simple monoculture, you know, you're a whole being, you're a geographical perspective, and we take people into these new locations. and we give them a glimpse of what it's like to be a person living the history and the physical nature of those locations.
In the UK, our seafaring history and the smallish size of our country has led us to have a deep love of the seaside and the coast. Do the Australians feel the same about their coast?
Oh, absolutely. We do love to live beside the seaside. I think there's a song about that, actually. Um, no, 80% of Australians live within 50 kilometres of the coast. We're very much a coastal society. Partly that's because the middle of Australia is very, 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 very dry. It's a desert, and so it's difficult to live inland. It means also that part of our inherent being is coastal. We love to see the ocean, we interact with it. I mean, we're often there on a weekend. People would rather, I think, visit the beach than they would climb a mountain. And maybe that goes for everybody in the UK as well, but it's very much part of our soul.
Individual editions of the original Coast have been to other countries, but those programmes have always been made by the UK production team. How has having a completely Australian team for this version affected the way the series has been made?
It's a little bit different. I think, we've taken the spirit of Coast. Obviously, we have a series of different presenters. Neil Oliver is the only one who's come across from the original UK Coast, and he's the main host. And the other presenters are all based here. So inevitably, it's a little bit different. I think we have a vastly larger coast. Someone calculated that given there's been 8 series of the UK Coast, there would effectively have to be 24 series of the Australian Coast for us to be equivalent.
That'll keep you busy.
Yeah. So I think, in essence, we're zipping around the coast a little bit quicker than would have been in the original series. And we're also much more sparsely populated country, like a tenth of the population that the UK has lives in a much, much, much larger area. So we have less of a British history, so only 200 years or so of colonial history, but we also have far more Indigenous history and also probably a vaster range of physical geographies than you might see in the UK. I mean, just Sydney Harbour, for example, and I'm boasting now, we have more than 560 species of fish recorded from Sydney Harbour, and that's more than double the number of fish species recorded for the entire coast of the UK.
That is phenomenal.
I know.
So just figures like that bring home the massive differences between our two countries, but it's that shared passion for the coast which makes the series work, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it makes me think that Coast as a program, because it's so holistic and it's so, encompassing of everything that people love about the coast, both underneath the water but on the shoreline, the built history, the natural history, it makes me think that this would work in any country, really, because all around the world, people love the coast and they love walking by the coast, feeling it and smelling the sea breeze.
And you're rushing off tomorrow to do some filming for Series 2 of Coast Australia, which is great news that there's going to be a Series 2.
I know, we're so excited. So we've been filming Series 2 since March. It's quite an epic adventure to do this across Australia. So tomorrow I fly for 5 hours across Australia just to get to the other side.
Good grief.
I fly from Sydney to Perth tomorrow, and then I fly north to the Pilbara region, which is
wow.
Incredible area. It's an arid zone right on the coast, and there are the oldest rocks in the world ever have been dated from the Pilbara region. It's just
that's amazing.
An incredible area. And so a whole episode of Coast Australia for Series 2 will be based in the Pilbara region. I'm so excited.
It's just a country for which superlatives were designed for, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to sound and not to sound trite, because everything is stunning. The sponges, and I'm a marine biologist, obviously, so I love, filter feeding organisms and coral reefs. But the sponges in this area are so diverse that, we're talking about 20% or so of the sponges for the entire world being found in this area, and most of them not yet described. So it's pioneering stuff as well as being, just beautiful.
When you think we're exploring space, it's quite remarkable to think that there are areas of this planet which we've yet to properly explore and new species to be discovered.
So much still to learn. And, that's exciting as a professor of marine ecology, but it's also, somewhat depressing that we're working in these areas, we're developing these areas, but yet we know so little about them. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Emma, thanks for taking time off to talk to us. It's been a real pleasure, and good luck for the filming for Series 2.
My pleasure. Thanks for talking to me.
Now, as one coast finishes here in the UK, it's time for another new series to start. It's the welcome return of the original coast, the mother programme, so to speak. And joining me to talk about what will be the 9th series is Steve Evanson, the series editor of Coast, all the way from Coast HQ in Bristol. Steve, thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to talk to you, Andrew, and thanks for having me on.
Are you surprised about how successful the series has been?
Yes, it constantly surprises me, the success of Coast, really. It's great as a team come up with something that allows you to explore so many different stories, I think, and allows people to reconnect with their coastline, and the history of it in all its forms. We've got 10,000 years of British history to go at, so the world's our oyster, really.
So going back to the first series, obviously to have a programme which can keep returning with new stories is a holy grail for television channels like BBC Two. But the original series was kind of a standalone piece, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the very first lines in the first episode of the first series is something like, "This is a one-off television event."
Good job it wasn't.
In our lifetime. Yeah, good job it wasn't, yes. So, obviously that first series was conceived as a circumnavigation, a journey right around the coast. The obvious thing being that when you get back to where you started, you've finished. So that was how it was meant to be. It was a snapshot of the British coast in 2004-05 when it was filmed, and it was transmitted in the summer of 2005. And no one really knew, as you never know really with TV shows, how successful it's going to be. I think the initial signs for Coast particularly uncertain because it wasn't a star vehicle. It didn't have a big name presenter, if you like, a big star person like kind of Billy Connolly or Alan Titchmarsh or Michael Palin.
If you're making it for ITV, they'd want a famous comedian to front it, wouldn't they?
Yes, exactly. And that was the original intention, that there would be a team of experts who would kind of feed into a more star presenter, if you like. Our 5 experts now have become stars in their own right after years on the show. But at the time, Nick was probably the most well-known of them. But the others, were fairly new to television. And the original idea was that, they would be a very well-known figure like Billy Connolly, for the sake of argument.
Yes.
But it turned out that it just got too difficult to find enough time to actually do the journey with someone of that then high profile.
Yes, because those sorts of people would find the time needed to film such an intense series of which Coast has turned into to be too much of a commitment from their schedules. Yeah. So if you're not careful, you end up with a series where the big name is just out on location for like 3 days or something like that, and the rest of the time everything's made without them, and you can spot that a mile off, can't you? Yeah,
we really had to feel that they'd experienced it, and Nick had, obviously didn't tread every inch of the coast, but he did large sections of it. We did have.
No, but you did feel that he'd made a significant way around the coast.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and he went to key places. We did the journey, and he did it in sections. So we did, I think, first part of the journey we did it in order. So he did it going around from Dover, around Cornwall, and onwards. So but he would take breaks in between. But that was a substantial commitment of his time. We're talking the best part of like a month and a half or something like that of time to do that.
Yes.
So it's a sort of week's work per episode, just being on the road. By the time you've travelled there, you've done the travelling and the filming, and there were 12 episodes, so it's a big commitment of time. Ultimately, we went away from that model, and I'm delighted that we did, because we ended up with something that's become a template for many other shows that have gone since, what's been called the magazine documentary. So it is a magazine show in the sense that it's an eclectic bunch of stories linked to the device of the linear journey around the coast. Look at Cloud Lab, for instance, which is a group of scientists, off on a journey. So it's, although
that sounds very familiar.
Exactly. many shows now have followed that kind of Coast model, and is something.
And Coast was really the first to do that, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first one, I think, where all the experts, they were experts, and that, they've all got proper credentials in their field, as historians or geographers or wildlife experts. They're not presenters in that sense. We always thought of them as investigators. They were going
Yes.
places to investigate the story with us rather than tell us what the story was. So that was very much a style of the show.
So we see the presenters on screen talking about the stories, but just how difficult is it in finding new stories which the vast majority of the audience don't already know about?
It's a funny one. You'd think, I'm not saying it's easy, but, over 9 series, and now series number 10 is being made as we speak. It's being researched and filmed. I think Nick is on Jersey filming at the moment, or
We've just been retweeting the photos.
Yes. So, it's still happening, and still great stories that surprised me are coming out in Series 10. And I think that's what we found in doing the first series, that it rapidly became apparent that, we weren't short of stories. It was really which stories to pick and try and get the mix right within the hour. And we had to drop some that, were great stories that we thought, well, we just can't do 2 war stories back to back, or we can't. We need kind of light and shade around the program. And the interesting thing about the first journey is that, what you'd call the running order of the program, the sequence of where the stories come along the hour was entirely determined by the geography, because you were doing a journey. So when we're making the shows now, because they're thematic rather than journey, they're based on a theme like, wild weather. And they can be anywhere in the British Isles, the stories, that we are free to put the stories where we like in the hour. Whereas before we had to stick to, that's the next story you come across, so that's what the next one is, whether it's, so we had to work hard to find a story that complemented the one that was going before it and the one that came after it, because you don't want stories all of the same type to come in a clump in the hour. You want variety so that people feel they're being surprised.
And it's great to see new presenters coming into the series.
Yeah, and that's been one of the really gratifying things, I think. Certainly the on-screen talent that we've had come through, who've gone on to do, other great things, recently, like Tessa Dunlop, Andy Tor, but there are some new faces for Series 9, like Helen Arney and Adam McIntosh in Scotland, who, to look out for, who I think are very exciting. And that's the great thing about a magazine-style show, because you've got just like a 5-minute slot. You can try new people who are experts in, whatever that story is you're talking about.
And now if you've missed the first broadcast of Coast, you can Sky Plus it, you can get it on iPlayer, you can watch it on Blighty and Yesterday, and you can even watch a short version when the snooker's finished early.
I think we'd say in our own immodest way that is because we try and put so much craft and detail into each story, and the way it's told. Often people will watch it again and get equally as rewarding experience because they'll see different things in the stories that they kind of missed last time.
Oh, yes.
The stories tend to be, by the standards of these things, quite full of information and facts and thoughts and images, and that can kind of overwhelm you a little bit at first viewing. But what it does mean is that they do bear repeating.
Oh, indeed. And another big part of Coast is the theme music and the incidental music throughout the show.
Yeah, that subtly becomes part of the format. I think that Coast music, the title theme, but then there are a number of alternatives, what we call the sort of journey music, which are riffs on the Coast title music, but they're subtly different, so they have a different take. So we have kind of tracks like we'll call them in the office the slow journey, which is the kind of.
And the team knows which one that is.
Yeah, the reflective kind of, it's quite slow, but it's still recognisably the Coast theme. But then there's the big, bold restart, press the restart button. So we use them when, we come to the end of a story. If it's a kind of celebratory story, I think there's for instance, a story in the first episode of the new series when Mark Horton talks about the birth of the Ordnance Survey. That would be a good point to press the big, bold Coast music, because it's kind of celebrating a British institution, and it's a broadly celebratory, big, feel-good story.
And now that the series is themed-based, you've got more of a scope to craft a programme rather than having to follow a map.
Yeah, it gives you more latitude as programme makers to think, what would come nicely after that. And some part of me does miss the old days of just what we used to call
this is what's next because it's on the map.
Yeah, the tyranny of the geography, I think was the phrase we had, which is kind of nothing we can do about that. Like it or not, Lulworth Cove is coming next.
Blackpool is next.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
And that's what it is, yeah. So you've got to get out of the Nazi concentration camp in Alderney to windsurfing on Studland Beach, whoever it might be, just because that's the next thing.
Yes. And another important part of the Coast format are the computer-generated graphics, which show events and landscapes long disappeared. And they're on an epic scale, aren't they?
Yeah, and the Jelly Television, who have done the graphics consistently and also did the graphics for Coast Australia, they do a fantastic job of giving that what we wanted. That epic scale was the trick for us. For that was having the computer-generated elements appear with the presenters when we could.
Yes.
So that they appear in frame with the presenters, so you get a sense of the scale. Often, you can stand under Titanic as it would have been in Belfast Dock.
Yes, because you need Mark Horton next to the Great Eastern to show how big it was.
I always love the idea that it's about coexisting time periods, so it's, if you could travel, if you could stand on one spot and travel through time, you would see all these things appear and disappear around you. These CGI elements appear and take the presenters back 200 years, as though they were standing there when the strange Volks railway was actually running down the sands.
So we're starting Series 9. Any particular highlights we should look out for?
Well, I'm very excited by Series 9 because it just feels like it continues to build, I think, on the strengths of the previous shows and making those, really embedding those themes. I think there's some really nice themes. We've got Episode 1 is the Channel, so that's quite an easy one to understand. You're looking at both sides of the English Channel from the French perspective and the English perspective. And then there's Secret Paths to Hidden Treasure, which is one I like particularly because I edit-produced that one. But it's basically a series of coastal walks. Although being coast, it's never quite as simple as a walk. So
Sounds good
one
to
of them
us.
is a roller coaster ride. One of them is a journey out following the seam of green marble out to sea. For the first time, we do the coast in winter for the culmination of the series. And Neil Oliver goes to Shetland to do the Peliar Viking Fire Festival, which is definitely one to look out for because you'll get some unique access to behind-the-scenes party and stuff. So,
fantastic.
Yeah, great fun. Lots to look forward to.
Now, Steve, when we were planning the way our video walk should look and feel, we always based them on the Coast style. And in fact, we describe them as like Coast, but for walks. But we've got a slightly smaller budget than at Antibes.
Yeah, I know you do a fantastic job. I think you've moved that on as well. But it's great to see some of those elements working for you. That your presenting style is very similar in that you are the guide. You're taking people through it. You're allowing them to kind of discover things for themselves as well, pictorially. Trying to let them feel they're discovering things for themselves as well.
So we're all looking forward to the series. It's great to see that there's a Series 2 for Coast Australia.
Yes, that's been a fantastic success, yeah.
Are there many more series to be had for the original Coast?
Our coastal story, because we're such seafaring, adventurous people and always have been, going way, way back to how people first got into these islands. We've got in boats and gone other places. There's all manner of stories about the British experience over 10,000 years to tell all around the world, really.
Steve, many thanks for joining me on the podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for another podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to leave us a comment or some suggestions, you can do that on iTunes or on Audioboo. You can find out more information about Walks Around Britain on our website, walksaroundbritain.co.uk. Until next time, thanks for listening and happy walking.